Biases podcast. I'm your host, Sheetal Jaitly. This is where we chat with our clients and other innovators and industry leaders about having an authentic but informal conversation on a variety of relevant topics, not only tech. But with me today, I have Sunil Godse, who's an intuitive branding specialist. And Sunil, over the past couple of years, had started building a relationship on Twitter. So it's amazing how this world starts connecting us. And so, Sunil, welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you.
Thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully you're going to drop some knowledge bombs and give your listeners practical ways to tap into their intuition starting today.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. You have the most creative title ever, because very rarely do I hear I'm an intuitive branding specialist. Actually, I've never heard that before until I met you. And you did drop a bunch of knowledge bombs on me, which brings us to the podcast. So what does that mean?
Yeah, so intuitive branding, what intuitive branding really is when you're looking at intuition and you tap into your intuition, you start to surround yourself with the right people. And the way that intuition does this is by establishing trust. And the trust is established and I took a deep dive into the science of intuition. Trust is established in under 14 seconds. And so when you have these things that we call intuitive signals, and you and I talked about on our podcast series, which is about to be released soon.
Give it a plug while we're here. You definitely
so that's going to be that's on the Intuitive Wake Up Call. So I've got you on two. There's the Intuitive Branding podcast, and that's called Crush Your Competition in Under 14 Seconds. And then you're a part of the second part will also be the Intuitive Wake Up Call moment. So it's one of those, the personal side of you and how intuition's played on that. So you'll be on basically two different podcast series.
Cool.
But when it comes to intuitive branding and we've all gotten to this situation where we kind of look at someone saying, I don't trust that person, or I do trust that person. Or you walk into a situation going, something is off here.
Something's off, yeah.
That takes under 14 seconds, what the research shows. And that's just what they can measure. And if you look at deeper into the science of intuition, it actually happens on average 7 to 10 seconds before we actually make a decision. And there's more research coming out of the University of Toronto that I haven't laid my eyes on yet, but they've measured that to 23 seconds before we actually make a decision. Your intuition knows what decision is that you need to make. And so when you operate a business based on this trust, which is built on intuition, you're hiring the right people around you that are going to really take your core values and move it forward. And they're the ones that are going to also be tapped into your customers and get your customers trusting you for your products and services as long as they're doing their job and using their intuition. And so when you start having a business just based on this intangible called intuition, employees want to work for you, customers want to buy from you, and the marketplace loves what you're doing. And when you have that trifecta, you crush the competition, because 99.9% of businesses are not doing that. And that's how you crush your competition. And again, the research shows under 14 seconds. And so that's what I help companies do.
So that is fascinating to me. And one of the things I want to talk to you about is this notion of 14 seconds and having our own preemptive biases and ethical biases. I try to tell myself, don't count someone out. And I always say this, don't count someone out, don't judge a book by its cover, whatever it may be. But the science is showing that in 14 seconds, I'm still making these decisions. In this world that we're in, what could we do to be better at stopping ourselves from possibly making the wrong bias type acknowledgement about something?
Yeah, and one of the important things is that there's actually 4 types of intuition that actually inform that signal. So when you get, there's 2 types of signals that you have. There's the positive signals that are telling you to move ahead. And so that's basically saying the decision you're about to make is the right one. And so we all have these signals that are unique. So for me, when I'm making the right decision, it's basically the dots are connecting, or I get a feeling, a sense of flow, or even a pulling towards that. And there was one CEO that I interviewed. He's run 2 multi-million-dollar businesses now on this intuitive signal that is an omen. There's this apparition that shows up behind his right shoulder, and when it comes up, whatever he's doing, whether he's dealing with a vendor or a business deal or an employee, he just says yes in that moment. And he's got 2 multi-million-dollar businesses under his belt because of this positive signal. And then you have these.
Yeah, but you learn to identify that signal, right?
He has.
It's almost like the cartoons. You got the angel and the devil,
exactly.
Go or don't go.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and where we have to do what we have to do, and I'll talk about negative signals as well in a
sure.
bit, but what we have to do is we have to take the time to recognize what these are. And so if you look at negative signals, for example, like the hairs in the back of my neck go up, the biggest one for me is I lose my peripheral vision. If something is wrong, my peripheral vision is gone. There's a hard focus ahead. My eyebrows cross, and I just have a focal point, and something is wrong. Either the situation, a person, something I'm thinking about in terms of a process in my mind. That's what happens to me. That's a big negative signal for me. And the thing with negative signals is they actually start very subtle in nature. And Oprah calls them the
Yeah,
whispers, and they get louder and louder. And so what we haven't done is that we haven't taken the time to identify what our unique signals are. So we can go on social media and people say, I listen to that voice. I have that gut feeling. And that's great for memes or themes, or it's a nice thing to have, or I live in the present moment. But respectfully, people don't know what they're talking about because they aren't living in the present moment. They're not listening to those signals. And so let's say, Sheetal, you and I do an exercise, and let's say that gut feeling is a negative signal. And let's say you do your homework and you know that that's signal number one. And
yeah,
I say that I'm lazy, and I come to you after coffee and say, yeah, I did my homework. I get that gut feeling. It is signal number one for me. But if I make that mistake of assuming it's signal number one, but it's actually signal number three, what I've done now is when I get that gut feeling and I haven't done my homework, I've missed my first two signals.
gotcha.
And when I've missed my first two signals, that's two bad decisions. So I could be stubbing my toe on a door, or I could be headed towards bankruptcy. I don't know.
That's so, I mean, I talk about my rise and fall as an entrepreneur. And you saying that right now, I was actually doing a conference call. I just went for a walk around Miami here in Brickell Key and was building up a nice sweat and was on top of the world. And all of a sudden my phone pinged and I looked down and I got an email. And that tunnel vision you're saying actually happened to me. I knew something was wrong as soon as I got that email. I stopped in my tracks and I could not stop staring at this building. I wasn't looking at the building, but I was thinking about the email I just got and was like, as soon as I get back to my desk, I gotta go solve this. Like my intuition was just like, there's a fire here. Not that the email was bad or anything like that. I was like, there's a fire here. Like you gotta pay attention to this right now. And it's funny you saying that. I was like, and then I even caught myself. I'm like, why did I stop walking and why am I just staring at this random building across the river here in Miami? And it's I guess identifying yourself and getting more familiar with yourself and knowing what these signals are is definitely self-awareness.
Yeah, and many people haven't done that. And so, for example, if you go to intuitionology.com, I've got a 7-day challenge, and it gets people to identify a problem, and then they go to what are their positive signals and their negative signals, and they actually identify that. But we haven't really taken the time to take that inventory of signals. And the what I found is when like you and I did the interview, and one of the first questions I asked you was what's your definition of intuition? But when the first interviews I had, the first question used to be, when did intuition impact your life? And 100% of the time when I asked that question, it was always when somebody hit rock bottom. That was the time that they
Always.
realized the
You asked a
intuition.
question and I started thinking about as a child where rock bottom was.
Yeah, or somebody said, I remember one. She was so nervous to be on camera. I don't like to be on camera, and I said, if you don't want to do this, that's fine. And she comes up to this room. There's my film crew, and I just look at me. We'll just have a conversation. And so then, and I said, at any point we can stop this if you're not nervous. No, I'm okay. So I asked this question: when did intuition impact your life? And she goes, well, I ignored my intuition and I was sexually assaulted.
Oh,
And for the
wow.
45 minutes, we talked about all the signs, all the signals that she ignored, one by one by one. And she
Wow.
got deeper. And this was she's an IFBB pro athlete. She's a brick.
Yeah.
And the guy still was able to overpower her and assault her. And so I've had those. I had someone who.
Yeah. So I guess like when we think of the intuition, we're going into extremes. Like when was I absolutely right the first day I looked at my wife and I knew I looked at her eyes and I'm like, I love her.
Yeah.
And then when you ask me when another way, I think, yeah, rock bottom. Like, hey, when the family went through a lot of financial hardship and like we almost lost our house. Like, and I'm going to two different extremes, right?
Yeah, and what happens is when you go through all your decisions that you have, good and bad, they're all associated with some kind of a signal, each decision, and especially the bad decisions. as I just did that exercise with you, it's not, if you had a bad decision, okay, you felt something, but maybe that was a louder signal. What was the decision before that triggered that one? And you have to keep going back to the original decision. And the thing that you also have to realize is these signals, positive and negative, are actually jam packed with tons of information. And so the research that I did, I spent over 10,000 hours looking at academic research. There's actually 4 types of intuition that tell you what to do. And that's why they give you that signal. And the best way I can describe these 4 types of intuition is through a case study of a non-believer. And so one of my first interviewees was a fellow by the name of John Rothschild. At that time, before he retired, he was chairman and CEO of Kara Operations. Mm-hmm. And so he says, Sunil, look, intuition doesn't exist. And so I said, oh my God, what am I going to talk with John? He said, come on, I'll give you an hour.
He disregarded all your research. He's like,
he just says,
this is some fluff, get out of here.
Exactly. He says, come on down. I haven't seen you. We'll catch up. We'll talk about intuition for maybe 5 minutes and, shoot the shit with the latte. So I turn on the cameras. And I start telling him about the CEO that saw the omens. And there was another CEO that actually had his left earlobe pulsated with heat every time he got into a venture for the wrong reasons, like ego, money, fame. His left earlobe pulsated. And I'm telling John this, and at the time, a lot of the research, a lot of the things on intuition was like voices from God, manifestation. John was an investment banker. So when it comes to data and spreadsheets, when you have voices from God and omens, he's not having any of that. He says, Sunil, look, I mean, that's great. Ultimately, your success, your decisions are based on learning and experience. And so now this is where I'm going to start educating John. I said, well, John, hold on. One of the 4 types of intuition is called experiential intuition.
Sure.
And if you look at your brain like an iceberg, 90% is below water, which is a subconscious area of brain, and 10%, which is your left and right lobes, are the 10% above water. When you're born, you have 5,000 to 6,000 experiences a day. At 28 to 35,000 when you're older. Every single day, every single one of those experiences, both good and bad, formal and informal, get put into your subconscious area of brain like a library, so that when you have a signal, you've got billions and billions and billions of data points that are telling you that if it's a positive signal, somewhere in the past, you've done something similar to say, yeah, you can do this. You've got the skills, you've got the experience, do that. And conversely, if you get a negative signal, it's going to say, Sheetal, come on. You did something in the past that this didn't turn out right. So why are you looking to make that same decision? Then again, I'm going to send you a subtle negative signal. And if you ignore that, I'm going to give you a louder one. And so one of the things I told John is that in some cases, your intuition goes against the data. Right. And he goes, that's funny, Sunil, you mentioned that. I have an exact experience like that. And so I said, okay, well, tell me what happened. So John was in the business of putting franchise locations together. And so he used a benchmarking system out of 10. And a 9 out of 10 meant that they put something like a McDonald's or Wendy's in. And they looked at things like demographics, traffic patterns, and development in the area as examples. There was this dilapidated area of Toronto that his team looked at. It was a 5.5 out of 10. And now we're going to get into the second of the 4 called situational intuition. Okay. He walks into this area of Toronto and he just looks around at this area and he goes, you know what? And now he's saying, perhaps this is my intuition. I'm not sure. Yeah. So at least I've got him to say the word. Yeah. He says, I told my team, we got to put it here. And he went against the team's advice. And that became the first beer market, which was the best franchise. Yes. That was the very, very first one. And it was based on possibly intuition, according to his words. And then we keep talking about intuition and teams and things like that. And then John's purpose changes. And now we're going to get into the third of the 4 called relational intuition. Okay. Now, John was, as an investment banker, this guy was probably making $3 to $4 million a year, high-end restaurants, limousines, all that stuff. He wanted to start owning a business, not run it on a spreadsheet. Gotcha. And so all the people who are concerned about money, fame, ego, all that stuff, none of them, not one, asked him why. All those people told him nuts. Only one person asked him what he wanted. And that's what relational intuition does. Relational intuition filters those people who you really want to listen to that are actually there, that guide you forward. And so his wife was the only one that his relational intuition got him to bring in and listen to. And his wife just says, John, why do you want to do this? And I'm paraphrasing John. This
Sure.
just feels right. Sometimes you can have all the data, but you have to trust your intuition. And my mouth is now, my jaw is dropping.
Yeah,
My
for
jaw is
sure.
dropping because 45 minutes earlier,
This guy
this
didn't
guy
want
was
me to
saying,
talk about it. Yeah.
exactly. And so the fourth of the four is called creative intuition. Creative intuition is the one that actually has you make the decision. So now you would think somebody with a really good investment banking background would pick a business to start, which has, either healthy cash flows or good revenues or a really good, strong balance sheet. His intuition says, nope, you know what? You're going to run this tiny bankrupt little restaurant. And so he rolls up his sleeves. He quits his investment banking, starts from, less than zero.
Yeah.
And he walks into that tiny little restaurant. That restaurant was Eastside Mario's location number one.
Oh, wow.
And over the next 20 years, he grew that to over $2 billion under different brand names,
Sure.
all because it just felt right. And that's the power of intuition.
That is unbelievable. I mean, so my relational intuition has me going crazy right now just listening to you. So caught on all the boats. So everything you're saying is completely resonating. What made you get started in this field? And I know we're going a little bit off topic, but
Yeah, no,
this is
that's
like
okay.
we're going all over the place.
That's okay. Yeah.
What made you say, hey, you know what? There's something more. Like, I love this quote. I actually used it earlier this morning. I said, in God we trust, and everything else there's data. And you're making me a non-believer in that quote that I just said this morning.
well, intuition does take data, right? So if you're looking at the data and the experience, that's all very relevant because all that goes into experiential intuition. So when you are looking at spreadsheets, when you have some data, absolutely, you need to back that up. You can go into a company and I said, my intuition knows this is where the company should go, but I've still got to back that up with data and process and things like that. Otherwise, nobody would hire me. But the way that I started was actually really after my first book that I wrote called Fail Fast, Succeed Faster. And the premise of that book was that if you were to look at if I could document the failures and hurdles of other people, then somebody picking up my book and reading it should be able to succeed faster because they're going to avoid these other failures because they've read about it. And that was the concept. And when I started going traveling around the world talking about the book, the one question I kept getting asked is, Sunil, why, tell me the one thing that's going to help me succeed. And, I'm rolling my eyes saying, look, I didn't come here with a cue card or a PDF worksheet. I came here with a 400-page book, right? Until I went back to the audio recordings. And when I went back to the audio recordings, what I focused on was what was the difference between success and failure when it came to these executives. And I quickly realized 80 to 90% of them, the difference between success and failure came down to three things. One was that they started, when they got to the failures, they said, I'm going to listen to myself. I'm going to trust my intuition. And they actually used that, that I got into the failure because I didn't trust my gut. I didn't trust my intuition. I knew what the right decision was. All that language around intuition.
Sure.
And
which are also, like you're talking about, their data points were ignoring.
Absolutely. And so that was the first thing, is to trust themselves. The next thing they did is to hire the right people around them and surround themselves with the right people. And if that meant letting people go, that meant letting people go. I mean, Brian Scudamore from 1-800 Got Junk, when he started, had 7 employees that weren't turned, and his intuition said, fire them all. And he got rid of all of them. And that was the secret to his success, because he surrounded himself with the right people, with the right vision that embraced his core values. He's a behemoth now.
Of course.
And then the third was that once you give your employees the ability to be creative, to trust their intuition, then they're able to make sure that the customer journey is the right one. And so when they did that, that's when those people succeeded. And so I started thinking, wow, so let me take a look at, when did intuition kind of hit me? Because now I'm really fascinated about this thing called intuition. And I distinctly remember when I was 5 years old, there were these video games that came out, and I asked my dad to buy them. And he said, Sunil, they're too expensive. And I had this voice, clear voice, that said, Sunil, that's not what you want to hear. You need to go door to door to raise money. And so there's this 5-year-old kid. I went door to door, lots of milk and cookies, and I raised $200. $100 went to my dad for the video games, and the other $100 went to charity because my school was doing that, and I really felt good about that.
Sure.
And I said, wow, I'm kind of an entrepreneur in the making when I was younger.
Yeah.
And then I started looking at when were the times that I ignored my intuition. And one of the first things that came up was my career. And so for those who don't know, Sunil, I'm a South Asian male, and there's 4 career doors for you. It's doctor, lawyer, engineer, or failure.
Right.
And I hit door number 3, which was engineering. And I completely ignored my intuition because my dad said, be the engineer, societal norms, or East Indian. You feel pressure to do that, even though my intuition is saying, be the entrepreneur, man.
Mm-hmm.
And I got into engineering and I hated it. And 2 years in, there was this Mexican restaurant chain that was coming up to Canada. And I ended up becoming a private investor in that. And within a year, I was making 5 times more in dividends than I was as a full-time engineer.
Sure.
And in year 3, I just said, bye, engineering, I'm gone. I lost my relationship with my dad. He didn't speak to me for years, but I was loving what I was doing.
You felt right to you.
I felt right to
and
me.
And that's not the sacrifice of probably arguably one of the closest people to you.
Yeah. Well, he didn't really take time to figure out what I wanted.
Yeah.
Right. He wanted to follow his ego, being a good East Indian. He can talk about me, his son being a doctor. Yeah. There was where was I in that process? Mm-hmm. And so when I decided to do that, go into entrepreneurship, I had 5 or 6 businesses, total about 20 million in revenues, and then turned into a management consultant. And then as a consultant, there was this huge contract in Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. And I was so enamored with the money, but the contract terms were changing. And my intuition saying, you better back off. Yet the money was so big that I said, no. Listen, I'm going to spend every single penny to go down there because I'm going to reap a lot of the rewards. And the company never paid me. And I came back to Canada broke. I had 23 cents in my bank account. My wife was in India at the time, where she lived. And I remember coming across the Canadian-US border, and she's phoning me, say, how are things going? And I said, oh, not bad. I'm just coming back to Calgary. I'll settle in and let's figure out where things are going to go from there. And I lost all the, I didn't know where I was sleeping that night, and all my money was gone. Like all the wedding money, wow. Everything completely gone. And perhaps the most devastating was when I was in engineering. I was doing personal coaching at the time. And there's this friend that reached out to me to said, Sunil, she was being stalked. Mm-hmm. And she said, Sunil, I need your advice on how to get rid of this. I have a problem. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, my intuition is saying, meet with her that afternoon. This is urgent. And I ignored it because a couple of buddies wanted to go for beers. And I said, yeah, maybe we can meet a couple of days later. And the very next day, that same stalker walked up to my friend in a bus shelter and put a bullet through her forehead.
Oh my God.
And killed her instantly.
Oh my God. And
so when I reflected upon that, I said, I really got to figure this thing called intuition now, because I've lost a career.
Yeah.
I got into the wrong career. I lost all my money, and I lost a really good friend because I ignored this thing called intuition. And that got me diving deep into the science of it. And that's where the statistics came out, the 7 to 10 seconds, the 23 seconds, it actually hits the amygdala, no capacity for language. So when I asked you about your definition in my podcast interview, everybody's definition is different because we define it. It's our experiences, it's our intuition, but we put our own language. So some people can call it voices from God. Other people call it's just experience. Others say, I get the omens, my things pulsate. Everybody's going to be unique and different. And so that's why we need to go back to the history of our decisions, good and bad, to say, okay, what are those signals for me? Because when those signals come up, if we don't do the homework, we don't listen to them. And now we're making a series of bad decisions.
Gotcha. Wow. There's a lot to take in there, Sunil. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem.
And one of the things I think intuition kind of also drives is as we're listening to your stories, we're relating it to things that happen in our lives. And your intuition's going, you feel up, you're down. You kind of had some good sides there, obviously some very downsides there. But is it always the extreme? Is there a middle ground? Is it always go or no go, or is there like a gray area?
No, it's a go or no go. And remember, it's hitting the amygdala, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's either you're going to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or you're not. It's one or the other. And one of the things that paralyzes us is fear. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so fear, and there's 3 types of fear: fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear of change. Mm-hmm. So if you're not going to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, then the signal is just saying, you got to move in this direction. Now, and of course, there's going to be mundane decisions like turning left at the lights and things like that. That's different.
Sure.
But when you're making big decisions, which is typically when we actually need to trust our intuition, we get this fear. But what you need to do is you need to still trust that signal. And a very good case study I have is one of the fellows I interviewed was a fellow by the name of David Dame. He's had cerebral palsy all his life. And he would go on beaches and with his wife. And he says, like, what if I can't go on the beach because I'm in a wheelchair? How do I actually dip my toes in the water? How do I have that sand caress my feet? I'll never know what that is. And then a couple of years ago, he said, I'm going to do it. Today's the day I'm going to do it. And so he gets his wife and his handlers to wheel him up to that sand water barrier. He gets lifted up and he feels things caressing and he's just loving it. And then he falls face forward into the water. And that fear comes up.
Sure.
And he says, oh my God, this is embarrassing. What are people going to think? And then he said, Sunil, I have two things to do with that in that very, very moment. The first thing is one of two choices. The first thing is I can sit back in my wheelchair and forever regret turning my dream into reality. I am right here. Or I can listen to the signals that my intuition is telling me, saying, come on, David, take that step. Come on, you can take the second step. And he continues to take a step. And he points to his chin. He says the water gets up to his chin area. And then he turns around and he was blown away by how far he had come. And that's what it means by living in the present moment. No matter what's happening around you, you listen to your signal and you take that step forward and you take that step forward and you don't worry about how far you're going because your intuition is going to take you there.
There's a couple conversations, even as of this morning, I was having with another founder, went through a very hard time. And it's good to see he's coming back, and we were sharing what we call our scars. And I talked about this on your podcast. Like, when you see this mountain in front of you, like, how am I going to move it? What am I going to do? And we take it, and he said it too. It's like we took it, chip away at it, rock by rock by rock by rock, and all of a sudden you're like, "Whoa! I actually moved the entire mountain." That was in front of it. And so, I talk a lot with our tribe here at TribalScale about, like, we got these big, hefty goals, and they're not going to happen overnight. But let's make sure we're taking those baby steps and always going towards them. We're going to get there. And obviously leveraging our intuition to go do that can make it happen. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that people, when you have that fear, what happens is inaction. And some people talk about manifestation, all that stuff. But it's great to have those intuitive signals, but you actually have to take action, and you have to make sure you don't fall back into those same habits again. And one of the other people I interviewed was a fellow by the name of Vin Jiang. He's an international keynote speaker. And back in 2016, this guy was speaking to 100,000 people, 80 stages around the world on communication. He was a former magician to an international magician. And by all means, downtown LA, beautiful lifestyle. From an external perspective, his life was absolutely stunningly perfect. Internally, he was a train wreck. And his intuition was saying, now's the time. You got to take time for yourself. And so he goes away to New Zealand, tells his wife he's got to fix this. No cell phone service, nothing. And he starts saying, okay, I'm going to put the values on my wall. What do I want as a leader, as a person? He puts them all up on the wall, and he starts looking at them. And he says they were hauntingly staring back at me. And he was saying, this is what my wife wants. This is what my boss wants. This is what my manager wants. This is what audiences want. Where am I?
What does he want?
Where am I? Right? Yeah. He pulls them all back, and he puts it finally after thinking what he actually wants in terms of his core values. And what he thought was a cathartic event, what he thought was going to be uplifting and freeing, he said was scary, because for the very first time in his life ever, he has given himself permission to be himself. And so he comes away with this renewed energy that he's going to live life based on intuition. And he falls back to the same old crowd. He falls back to the same old big brands and living externally, and money is everything. And for 6 months he does that. And his parents come up from Australia, and his mother pulls him aside, and she says there's a saying in Vietnamese that when you hang around squid, at some point you're going to get ink on you. And she says, Vin, you're hanging around a lot of squid. This is not my boy. And so he quickly gets rid of all his friends.
So wake
He
up call.
gives
It's his wake up call.
a huge wake up call, gets the minivan, goes to the suburbs, sells everything. And there's something that I call opportunity cost. And opportunity cost, when I explained it to Vin, I said, Vin, it's not just the 6 months that you lost, not listening to your intuition. It's also the 6 months that you didn't gain by trusting your intuition. Right. So you've actually lost a full year of your life.
You're 12 months behind that.
Yeah. And if you're in the business of helping 100,000 people a year, how many people did you leave behind? How many people didn't you help? And he said, Sunil, I've never, ever thought about it that way. And so that's the other thing. If you make a bad decision, it's double the cost, right?
I love that story because it was exactly where I was going. So I was having a conversation with a very close family member this past weekend, and we were talking about mental health. And he was like, "Hey, did you very openly speak about the subject?" And like, here's some things that when we really started getting deep. We were a couple of drinks in, but we started getting deep that on a level we don't usually do. And we started getting deep. And one of the things that we were talking about, like, there could be a dark cloud over there, and everything in us is telling us not to go towards that dark cloud. But we still keep going towards it. And so as we talk about intuition, to learn to your intuition, to do the opposite, why is it that and I see this even when I kind of find myself maybe going into some depressive kind of funk or whatever it may be, much closer I'm catching out of now, but why is it the step I know I'm taking is wrong? But for somehow I feel like that is the easier path and I keep going towards that dark cloud. What could we do as a society? And I think that really related with me. I'm not sure if that analogy relates with anyone else, but what should we be doing as a society to stop doing that? Because like you said, it is those baby steps to get away from it. I think that story you just told about Ben, he knew what he was doing was he identified what was not right in his life and he still kept going towards it.
Yeah. And so there's a couple of things. One is, and I talked about fear. One is just sort of the fear of going that other direction. Everybody loves certainty in their lives. And so when there's certainty, we kind of do that. So that's one. The other thing is we haven't really spent the time to take a look at what those negative signals are. Right. And so that's the other thing. And the third one is how many of us have actually take a step back to really think about some of these things. And these are areas that I talk about called intuitive mediums. And I just did a 1 minute thing on being creative. And so when you want to be creative, you can't do this when you're depleted of energy, when you're emotionally upset or things like that. You have to just take a step back when you've got the energy and think about the situation. And when you think about the situation and you think about the path that you're going to do, if you know what your intuitive signals are, when you think about, okay, should I take the left or right path? That signal will tell you the left path is the right one. And if you start thinking, well, I'm going to go on the right path, if you even take a step in that direction, then there's a louder signal that's going to be coming, or it changes. And because we're too emotionally high and we don't necessarily take the time to step away, cut out the noise, really think so it could bring the emotions down, or we're really, really working on dopamine all the time. Mm-hmm. We don't take that time to get into what I call our intuitive mediums and to think about it. So for example, if I go on long drives, that's one, or in the shower, right. Or sometimes I'll just have to go for a walk if I have a problem, and I'll think about these things. And when I think about them, I try and I think about how do I plot this out? And I'm listening internally for those signals as to, okay, I'm thinking about going this way, then this way, then this way. And I'm paying attention to the signals. And at this point, because I'm so immersed in intuition, I'm very good at picking out what the right path is very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. And this is where people just don't take the time to step back and recognize those signals, because every single person that's got into anything bad in their decisions, and I've got over 1,200 people now I've interviewed, 100% of the time, they've known the moment that they made that right decision, there was a signal. And so what I'm doing is I'm going back in time to show them what those intuitive signals are. And I'll give you a very good case study. One of the people I interviewed, and she went through my coaching program. She didn't know what her intuitive signals are. We got her back to her intuitive signals, and she was sitting at home. In her parents, they own a kitchen land in Toronto. It's a big sort of kitchen store. And she was sitting at one of the business partners' desk, and she got this signal that we unearthed during my coaching program. She goes, "There was my intuition saying, open this folder on this computer," and she's saying, every fiber of my being is saying, this is not my computer. I can't click on that folder.
I should not be doing this.
I shouldn't be doing that. But this signal was so strong that she says, okay, I'm going to click on it. She clicks on this folder, and she noticed that there were a bunch of invoices that were being collected by the business partner. So the invoices were running through Kitchenland, but this guy was collecting the checks himself personally. And it was a major project. So he was actually stealing from the company. And had she not clicked on that folder, that, I think it was a 30-year family business, wiped out with one project. That's how big it was. Wow. And it was that signal that she now learned about that got her to do that. And so that's why it's really important that you take the time to figure out what your signals are. And these are your signals. These are your experiences. This is what you've been through. So this is nothing that's magic that I'm going to be bringing up or you're going to be bringing up that's very customizable, that is proprietary for me. This is your stuff, right? Mm-hmm. All I'm doing is I'm taking a light saying, okay, here's the signal. It's big. I'm going to magnify it, but you better pay attention to those subtle signals when they come up. And so when you start operating like that, then it doesn't matter what people say. It doesn't matter what what you get into, what you don't get into. You're taking the steps that are right for you. Gotcha. And when that happens, what you also start to surround yourself with those people that are there for you. Mm-hmm. And you start to filter out those people who aren't really there for you at all. And so your intuition becomes a really good filtration mechanism. And so, and it's a quality versus quantity game. Some people want to have a lot of friends, but are they really friends? In the deep trenches, will they be there for you? Right. And you really find out at those rock bottom moments who's there or not. And so it's really kind of doing that homework on those. Yeah. And so you really got to do the homework on those signals, because that's the engine for your intuition.
There's something that you mentioned during this last little part that when we were talking, you were talking about dopamine and adrenaline, and my mind went to like, what if you're a gambler or a drug addict? And that's like the high you chase. It may not be the right thing, and it seems like your intuition is probably telling you not to do it, but you're still going and going for that dopamine or adrenaline hit. And one of the things that, in a day-to-day life that I try to do is, I know if I wake up in the morning and don't jump in the shower right away, I want to be lethargic. I'm not going to get up. I'll probably miss a meeting, whatever. Like this, it's just not going to be a good day. But my dopamine hit is, well, as soon as I get in the shower, it's like, Sheetal, you're up. Let's go. Look at yourself in the mirror. Say your little motivational mantra you want to say to yourself in the mirror, and let's go start the day. What should people be doing? How should they be fighting that dopamine urge, which may be used against you in a lot of cases?
Yeah. So when it comes to things like addiction, especially with addiction, so there's 4 types of relationships that really screw people over, and an addiction comes from one of these 4 when they get affected by it. One is when you've got some trauma when you're younger. And so somebody's put you through something and you haven't emotionally gotten over that. And what happens when that happens is, because the intuition hits your amygdala, which is the emotional center, the trauma has you overcharged on that emotion, and you haven't taken the steps to really kind of get rid of the emotional attachment to that trauma. And so I do things like hypnosis or hypnotherapy to get rid of that for my clients. And when they're able to do that, they appreciate what's happened in the past. They know that they've been through that. The intuitions learn from those by reading people and looking at the language and body language, so that when they get approached by somebody else in that same scenario, that history has come up to say, whoa. I'm warning you that this has happened in the past. Stay away from that person. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the 4. The second of the 4 is when somebody judges you. And so sometimes someone will say, well, sometimes one sentence will take you down a
rabbit hole. Yeah.
Rabbit hole. And then
happens to all of us. It happens to all of us.
Absolutely. One sentence, you keep harping on that sentence, and it screws you up. Then the third one.
Just a story on that.
Yeah, sure. For sure.
See why it goes down a rabbit hole. You just make me think. Early in my career, I was supposed to go speak on a panel, and in comes in this executive is like, you can't speak on a panel. You're not ready. And sure enough put someone else to go like speak on the panel, even though all the reasons to be on the panel were because of all the work that I did. And I remember I could not sleep that whole night, just like that one little moment. And I'm sure that person doesn't even know that they did that to me, but I did not sleep 1 minute that night. It just drove me crazy. So yeah, even something completely out of your control just takes you down a rabbit hole.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then the third one, which happened to me, was listening to people who don't really care what you want. Mm-hmm. It's all about them, and my career is a really good example of that. And the last one is judging yourself. So when you're actually doing things to prove to other people, this addiction, people with addicted brains, they're trying to prove themselves to a whole bunch of other people, and so that's what happens. And so whenever you get affected by any one of these four relationships, what happens is you're living through the values and the lens of other people, and you start to ignore what you want in life. And so these intuitive signals are there, but where's your attention? Your attention is on a whole bunch of other people. And so when your attention is on a whole bunch of other people, you're not listening to your signals, you're ignoring them. And so they're saying, no. This is the path for you. And addiction is like that as well. The addicted brain gets one of these four relationships, screw them. And so they're there to prove whatever it is to other people. But every single one of those people who were addicted at one point that I interviewed absolutely knew that what they were getting into, they had to listen to their intuition to get them out. The drugs hides the problem. The alcohol addiction hides the problem, but the problem is still there. And they know the moments are there. They open up that door to have a beer. They know. They light that pipe. They know. And I'm not alcoholic. I've never been addicted or anything, but every single person that has had come on my show that's had an addiction problem, 100% of the time, they knew that they shouldn't have done stuff. And so this is where they have to get back to trusting themselves, trusting the signals that their intuition is giving them, and then they can move on. And that's how they treat themselves. And sometimes it does take rock bottom. But unfortunately,
sometimes
that's what they're going to need. That's the way it is.
So there was one thing on my speaking notes here that I'm really interested in asking you, and that is 3 intuitive pillars you need to crush your competition in under 14 seconds. So like, what are those pillars?
Yeah. So what I essentially do with any company that comes through with my program, the first thing is I look at getting the leaders to really demonstrate what's their intuitive signals. What are their intuitive capabilities? And we've got the 4 types of intuition. Which one of those 4 types really drives their decisions? Mm-hmm. Once they're comfortable with themselves and trusting their intuition, then they can establish those empathetic relationships with those employees. Then what we do is we take a look at the employees and who are you hiring? Who are you bringing in? What are your core values that are driving the right talent? And so the pillar number 1 is going to be you. Pillar number 2 is going to be your employees. And then the third pillar is going to be your customers. So once your employees are they know they're in a trusted environment, you're allowing them to use their intuition. They map the customer journey properly. They've got the right sales skills. They've got the right marketing messaging going out. That's when they track the customers. And that's the third pillar. And when you have all those 3, you're going to start bringing customers in from your competitors. You're going to have people not wanting to leave you. And that's how you crush the competition, because the competition is not even doing that. And once again, that's under 14 seconds because of the research I've done. And that's how intuition works. And when you have that 2-way trusted relationship, that is a really strong bond. And if it's not strong, then you've hired the wrong person or you've got the wrong customers, because they don't really value what you have. They value something else. And so you should be happy to say bye-bye to those people, because they're not the ones that are going to help you win that competitive game.
One of the things I'm starting to realize, and I love it, because like you really shy away from the gray area. Things are very black and white speaking to you. And even the stories you're telling are very black and white. Like you got 2 paths. Which one are you going to take?
Yeah.
In most instances. And I think we're starting to live in a world where it's like we blend the lines and we blur the lines just because it's the easier thing to do way more often. But like being bold and confident in yourself and what you're doing and in your intuition, knowing which way to go, is something that I'm getting a huge takeaway from in this conversation.
Yeah, and if you even take, and we were just talking earlier about my daughter, and both my daughters, of course, I talk about intuition all the time, and so they kind of understand now that it is about not listening to other people. Don't let other people tell you what to do if it's not the right decision. And both of them have actually moved away from bullying incidents because they've seen that behavior. It's crossed their values way before that bullying thing starts to happen. They're 9 and 14. And so they're quite young. And so to make those decisions, to be able to, and Avni, of course, she's got her nonprofit business, but for her to stand on a stage and speak, and she's very shy, but she gets that she's just sharing her purpose with others. And when she shares that purpose of helping those with disabilities with others, that's when you attract that tribe of people saying, I want to support you.
Right.
And so that's how she's built that business in a year and a half.
Which is amazing. We got to give a plug to it. I can't wait. I want to be a customer.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard
to empty Miami walls. The art behind Sunil right now on this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Tell us a little about what she's doing.
Yeah. So I'll tell you the story of how this happened. We were in India in 2018, and she's been an artist since she was 4 years old, and she saw these postcards, beautiful postcards, and then she found out that these were people who didn't have arms. And she goes, Dad, like look at how these people are treated and look at the beauty they have in art. This is so beautiful. I want to help them. And of course, her dad, being with intuition, says, it's got to come from you. What does your intuition tell you? And so I just let it rest with her. 6 months later, we're playing some board games in our living room, and she's just staring into space, and she whips her head around. She goes, Dad, I'm ready. And of course, I have no clue what she's talking about because we're playing a board game, right? I said, ready? It's not your turn. It's your daughter's. It's my other daughter's turn. What are you talking about? She goes, no. Remember that thing that happened in India? I said, yeah, I'm ready. Okay. So what does your intuition say? I'm going to open a nonprofit business. I'm going to start painting. I'm going to raise some money. I'm going to have an event where people with those with disabilities can come, and the money I raise is going to help them feel special. I'm going to pay for everything, and then I'm going to keep doing that. And I said, okay, are you sure? And she goes, 100%. The very next day, we opened up an official federal nonprofit corporation. A month and a half later, she has her first fundraiser. Her target was $2,500. She raised over $5,000. All her originals were gone in the first hour of a 3-hour event. We even had somebody from Scotland FaceTiming, watching, and bought a painting. A couple of months after that, we had a pop-up event. Staples sponsored that event. I know we've got some time coming up. Staples sponsored the event, and she had people from Big Brothers and Big Sisters, Down syndrome, and all these people with disabilities. A couple of people in wheelchairs had come, and they just painted to just to feel really, really good. And the one thing that really solidified her purpose, there's this fellow named Carl who has a cerebral palsy. And he says, Parkinson's disease. He had Parkinson's disease. And he says, Avni, come here. And so Avni comes up to him. And this is on video, by the way. This guy's arm was, if people can see, his left arm was just shaking violently. And he says, this is what your event is doing to me. He takes his paintbrush, dips it in paint, and starts to paint. And his left arm stops shaking. And he said, my mind is free. My mind is clear. I have not painted since I was 18 years old. This is a 40-some-odd-year-old man. Thank you so much for what you do. And that is purpose-driven entrepreneurship. And that's exactly what she's there to do. And so her painting, the money she's raising is for that moment, and moments like that for everybody who attended her event. And then what we did is we took all those paintings, we put them on a shirt, and we hand delivered that shirt with her logo, of course, in the back to each and every attendee. And they were like stunned, saying, oh my God, I had no clue. And the joy that brought somebody in a wheelchair or with Parkinson's disease or with Down syndrome or what have you, or Big Brothers, Big Sisters for these poor kids that have trouble at home, she's been able to give them a moment of joy, 2 hours of joy where they were just themselves.
Right.
And that's when you do things and you're humble about it. Right. And so those are the basic skills we're teaching her about: being humble, living her purpose, trusting your intuition. But that's the output that comes from those inputs that are intangible. But now we've got some tangible outputs. And what a way to live a life.
What a great way. What a great great story. I want to make sure everybody that knows it, go to heartification.com and then purchase some paintings. What a great cause.
Thank
Definitely.
you.
And if you ever want a piece of art on your wall that has a deep story behind it, you just heard it. So that's even more impactful, I think, as you're telling me the story. I'm falling in love with the art without even seeing it.
Yeah, well, she'll be sending you an email for a podcast interview. So
I'll be happy to do it. I'll be humbled to do it. He must be a really proud dad.
Very proud, very proud,
very
yes.
proud dad. And what a great way to even, for the parents listening on getting comfortable. And Sunil, one of the things, speaking to you is like, you're helping me get comfortable with my inner self. And I think it starts with you, right? Get comfortable with your inner self, and you can pass these awesome experiences down to your children, as opposed to being in the rat race or in the hamster wheel, just going 1,000 miles an hour, really with no purpose-driven initiative, right? And so, like, listening to your intuition and knowing yourself is going to only help those around you more. Very heartwarming story. Very heartwarming story. I hope I summarized that right.
Yes.
Sunil, one of the we've talked a little bit about the science. We've talked about the various pillars and how you can dissect this stuff. Where has some of your teaching gone the wrong way? I always like to talk about, and you wrote a book on this, like where the failures. Where's been like, oh, I was trying to work with someone and it completely effed up, and why?
Yeah, absolutely. So my failures have been always when I didn't trust myself. With the management consulting contract that went south, my engineering career, and when I ignored those, it just went completely south.
Actually, I mean, like when you're working with a customer.
Oh, the customer.
Hey, I want to have intuition as part of our philosophy as a competitive edge. For me personally, for my employees, and that went wrong.
Yeah. So one of the things that the way that intuition works is it's instant in nature. And so when you approach a business or a process or a problem, everybody will have an intuitive thought about that. And what you need to do is back that up with data and your processes to make sure that happens. And to give you a case study, there was one company that I approached, and they were struggling. They were about $400,000 they had about 6 months of cash left. And so the two co-CEOs just needed some help, saying, can you salvage our company? And so they hired me on. And right away, as soon as I walked in, I had a team meeting with everybody, and my intuition said there's zero trust between management and employees. And then it also identified a couple of cancer employees that you just knew just by their body language and how they answered a couple of questions. These people have to go. And so one of the first things I did, even though the company was struggling, is I need to rebuild that trust. I told the two co-CEOs, back off. Let me move it from here. If you want to save your company, this has to be done the right way. First thing I did is I raised wages for everybody, and that they're going, wow, this new guy seems to care.
We're burning cash. We want to extend our runway. We want to spend more money, and the employees are like, great.
Yeah. So that's the first thing, is that they were valued, and rightfully so. They were being paid minimum wage for a really good skill set. So I just brought them up to really kind of industry standard, and then a little bit more to show that they were. And I started appreciating and instituted some year-end bonuses and things like that. We had some new contracts signed, and then we decided, okay, how do we fix this company? And it was involving them in the process. And once I involved the employees, then I said, these are really good ideas. Let's implement them. And never before were they ever listened to. And once they started listening to that, then we started tapping into the customer journey. And then the customers started feeling appreciated. So now the employees are dealing with customers. By this time, we got rid of the employees that were bad, that really didn't care. They saw the customers as numbers. And pretty soon we took that $400,000 company. In 2.5 years, we raised that to $3.5 million. We expanded like crazy. And the customers and this was in the healthcare space, so physiotherapy and massage. We were getting groups of people coming in swaths together because it was so fun in this sort of treatment area. And normally they would close the curtain there because they're being treated. They'd open it up, they'd start telling jokes, and it was like being in a bar. right?
Yeah,
But although this is like a physiotherapy office, and the experience was great.
more
And like
fun as opposed to like, ow, you're hurting me.
absolutely, like 3 or 4 people coming at once. There was one who was a local police officer. He started telling other people, and of course there's some insurance based stuff. But then we had swaths of police officers coming, and so they started doing the marketing for us. 10% off massages on their birthday, and we had all these cards come out, and they felt so appreciated. The employees were having fun, and they were being valued, and it was a great experience. And so when I was in expansion mode and looking to go to other cities, I could concentrate on being creative and looking at the right places to go, because the underbelly of the processes that went underneath that, the operational stuff, was taken care of about my employees, because they were happy to do that. So I can be creative, I can expand. The underbelly of the pillars, the foundation, were already being taken care of, because I cared for employees and I cared for the customer. And that's how we were able to expand to 3.5 million from 6 months left in the runway. And it was all based on trust. Trust, this intangible thing called trust. And if you want metrics, we can always look at productivity. You can always look at the 3.5 million in 2.5 years, but those are laggard indicators. And too often we hang our hat on laggard indicators when it should be the leading indicator that we should concentrate on, which is treating people right. And that leads to productivity increases. That leads to trust in the environment. That leads to the bottom line. That leads to multiple purchases. That leads to decreased marketing costs. Tons of stats out there. But that's really based on trust. And that's built on intuition. And that's, again, where your 14 seconds comes in.
So I love the method of how you describe it. It's like, hey, let me speak to the founder or the CEO or whoever it may be, and then let me get the team involved, because that's where the proof is in the pudding. And then get buy-in from everyone to actually go achieve actionable objectives, which I think it seems so simple, but it's something as a founder I struggle with. I'm sure a lot of my peers go and struggle with, and so. You have this process that you could actually come in and implement for these founders or these executives who have larger teams and enterprises.
Yep.
Very, very cool. Very cool. Well, I'm actually really interested, because like now I'm even thinking at TribalScale, like how can we get better at it?
Awesome. I'd love to help out
and start working on that. And I'm not just saying that because you're on the podcast. Like, I think we've hit a lot of different tones and a lot of things. I know as a founder, why do I gotta recreate the wheel? Like, I'll have somebody hold my hand and take me down this journey the right way. And so my intuition is yelling and screaming to go and do this with you, just so you know. So Sunil, before we end off here, what are some key takeaways you think our audience should remember from this conversation?
The first thing is, find out what your intuitive signals are. That's very, very important. Recognize that it's like driving a car. When you drive a car, you turn the key, press the button, and you hear the engine roar, and you run. You don't need to know what's under the hood, the 4 types. If you want to dive into that, absolutely no problem. That's something I can help you understand. But just listen to your signals. What are the positive ones? What are the negative ones? Go back in history, and you can do this today. You go to a sheet of paper. What were the good decisions you made, and what did it feel like? What the bad decisions you made, what did it feel like? And you keep going backwards to the original intuitive signal. Once you have these inventory of signals, every single decision you make will be accompanied by that signal. And then spend the time initially to listen. If you have a really important decision, take a step back and figure out what are the signals attached to that decision. And as you get more experience, that's going to become quicker and quicker and quicker. And then find out where you listen to them best. In the shower, you mentioned one. Shower for me is a big one. Just before I go to bed, just before I go down with my daughters, my wife and I have this routine that we sleep with each of the daughters and have a chat before they go to bed. Most of the time, even before my pillow hits the pillow, my head hits the pillow, I'm out. I'm in la la land thinking about intuitive thoughts. And then they all say, they put their arms in front of me. Dad, are you thinking about intuitionology again? I said, I'm so comfortable here. But figure out what that is for you. So if it's biking, if it's going for a walk, sailing, whatever it is, think about those decisions, think about those signals, and take the time to do it. Don't go off these themes on social media saying, I trust my gut. I live in the present moment.
Well, we talked about it. To be chasing that dopamine again. That's probably not right.
Absolutely. Do what's right for you. And who cares about other people's that aren't part of your tribe? You're going to get a lot of negativity. You might get some opinions. Who cares? This is your train. This is the track you're on. And if people don't like it, tell them to get off at the next station. If they continue to bother, kick them off the train.
Right.
Right.
Right. Awesome. Sunil, how do our listeners get a hold of you?
Absolutely. So if it's anything on intuitive branding, they can go to sunilgodse.com and they can book a call to see if I can help them in any way. On the personal side, if they're looking to strip their relationships in under 14 seconds, they can go to intuitionology.com. I do have a 7-day challenge there that people can go through. And in that 7-day challenge, they pick a problem and I actually get them through a 7-step proprietary process on getting a few of the signals. And in that 7-day challenge, I have 2 people that actually go through with them in every single day. One person actually sold his house in 7 days. And so he sold his house in 7 days in that challenge.
Wow. The stories you got are just, I mean, I guess after you meet with over 1,200 people just studying intuition, you've heard it and seen it all.
Crazy stories.
Sunil, thank you so much for joining us on the First Name Basis podcast. It's been a very informative talk to me, almost game-changing for me, and just thinking about how I'm thinking about some of the choices I make in life, and I hope it's been the same for our listeners. You can catch the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. We blast it everywhere. Thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.